Welcome everyone to today's event. Thank you for joining us. We're here today to introduce the Skills Accelerator programme. My name's Rizwana Parveen. I'm Deputy Director for the division that's called Provider Transformation within the Department of Education, and we sit within the wider Post-16 Skills and Strategy Directorate that's led by Keith Smith as Director. So I'll be chairing the event today, so it's really good to see lots and lots of you here today. So we have an hour and a half together, so I'll be leading us through that conversation. So with the next slide, please, Natalie. Great, thank you. So before we kick off, just a few introductions and some housekeeping points. So as I say, I'm Rizwana Parveen from the Provider Transformation Division. I'm also joined today by Alan Krikorian, who's the head of the Local Skills Improvement Plans team, and Steve Oram, who is the head of Strategic Development Fund and College Business Centres. So technology allowing, we're all going to try, so the three of us are going to try and have our cameras on to help you to put some faces to names, etc. But as I say, if you could all mute yourselves and also please turn off your cameras, that will be fantastic. It'll help us to have the best chance of internet connectivity. There's lots of us on this call today, so it would be great if you could just turn your cameras off, mute yourselves, and we will try and stay on camera as long as the technology allows us to do so. So the main objective of this event is to get your information that you will need to submit your bids. So what we will be doing is taking a lot of time and dedicating quite substantial slots to questions and answer session. And we already have some questions that have been submitted ahead of time. So what we'll do is we'll try and address those at the relevant points within the agenda. If you do have a question during the event, please could use the chat function to type that in rather than the hands up function, because it's with so many of us on the call today, it's easier to manage the chat function than it is to come to people with their hands up and letting people come in. We will respond honestly and transparently to all of your questions today, but just to note that the formal responses for the record will be posted on Jagger, so on the commercial system that's been designed for this purpose. As I say, please submit your questions at the relevant time in the agenda. So we'll be dedicating a slot to local skills plans and then a slot to the Strategic Development Fund. I'll let you know when we're talking about which element of the agenda, and we'll also share the agenda in a minute so you know what to expect from the session this morning. I'm sure you'll have lots and lots of questions, and we will try our very best to get through as many of those questions as possible. But if we don't manage to, so the questions that we don't manage to get to, we'll respond to them via Jagger afterwards. And again, that's why if you can type your questions in the chat function, we can ensure that we collate all those post the event. I do have to let you know the event is being recorded, so it's been recorded so that we can share it afterwards with colleagues who aren't able to attend today. Yeah, helpful for you to know that as well. Okay, great. Natalie, could you move us on, please, to the next slide? Thank you very much. So, as I say, the aim of the event is to give you a forum to ask questions, get answers, and we'll keep the sort of us talking to sections to a minimum, so it gives us the most opportunity to have lengthy Q&A sessions. We are going to be joined by Minister for Apprenticeships and Skills, so Gillian Keegan, shortly, who will kick off our discussion with a few words about what the programme means in the context of the government's wider skills agenda and the jobs agenda as well. And we'll spend around around half an hour sharing information and answering your questions about the local skills improvement plans, and then followed by the same format for the Strategic Development Fund as well. And as I say, we expect the event to last about an hour and a half. So I think we're all together here till around 11 o'clock today. Okay, great. Natalie, if you could move us on, please. Thank you.
I think the minister's here, Riz, I believe.
Fantastic. If the minister is here, then without further delay, happy to pass over, and we can come back to this section of the presentation post hearing from the minister. So, Minister Keegan, are you with us?
Hi, Rizwana. This is Anisu from Minister Keegan's office. Alas, I am not the Minister for Apprenticeship and Skills. At least not yet. Anyway, I believe the Minister's just making her way into the meeting and she should be us in the next couple of minutes or so.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Well, I think then we've got a bit of time. We'll rattle through this next slide then. So, what is the Skills Accelerator? The Skills Accelerator brings together local skills improvement plans and the Strategic Development Fund, both of which were announced in the white paper. And the Skills Accelerator programme is the overall branding for both those policy initiatives. And as many of you will know, the White Paper's mission is to reform our skills system to make sure that there is opportunity for everyone, wherever they live, to level up the country and to address skills gaps that are holding back our economy, especially in sort of the current pandemic and post-pandemic economy that we may find ourselves in. We're piloting both the local skills improvement plans and the Strategic Development Fund through the Skills Accelerator, and the idea is to help us to test and gather evidence, which will enable us to shift towards the vision of the white paper for more collaborative post-16 system with employers at the heart of that system. And as I say, it's really to be led by employer representative bodies. Local skills improvement plan Trailblazers will be created by employers and providers, with employers setting out credible evidence-based assessments of their skills needs, and providers being empowered to respond to those needs. And alongside those new plans, the Strategic Development Fund will explore how providers can work together more effectively alongside employers and other partners to respond to those local skills needs and those innovation priorities that are kind of coming up in those local areas. Sorry, Anesu, do we have the minister? If you could just let me know when she joins, then I'm not rattling along and
Hi. Hello.
Hello. Hi, good morning.
I've been here listening to you, but I was muted.
Okay, well, welcome to our session today. Everybody's very excited that you could take the time to speak to us today. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Minister.
Oh, thanks very much, and I enjoyed listening to your introduction. I'm delighted to be here because it is so important. What we're embarking on. For those that don't know me, I'm Gillian Keegan. I'm the Minister for Apprenticeships and Skills, and I am delighted to be talking to you about the Skills Accelerator programme because these are words that we really do have the opportunity to put into action and change direction of skills and technical training within our country, and bringing the two halves of the system together, the providers and employers, is really at the heart of the Skills for Jobs white paper, which I'm sure you've got that message by now, but it's wonderful to see you all here, albeit virtually, and of course thank you for your interest.
Good morning.
Sorry, someone needs to go on mute there. So as I'm sure you know, the Prime Minister, the Secretary of State and myself have huge ambitions for our skills system, and it reflects both the incredible work that's already happening on the ground, and we're aware of that, and the untapped potential to achieve more for individual learners, businesses and our economy. And I know from conversations with many providers that you are ready to take on a greater role in shaping and driving skills development, and that will, of course, you understand, enable your learners and community communities to thrive. And it's great to see so many colleges here that I've had the pleasure of visiting over the last year, and I look for either virtually or in a couple of them in real life, and I do look forward to visiting many more as we embark on this journey together. But at the same time, I know from my own personal experience of spending almost 30 years working for many different businesses in many different countries around the world, that employers are often frustrated at the lack of skills that could really help their businesses fly. And the data is very clear on this. I have my own personal experience, but if you look everywhere you look now, there are huge skills shortages that need to be addressed. And the Employer Skills Survey in 2019 suggested there were 214,000 vacancies, which employers were unable to fill because they could not find the people with the right skills, qualifications or experience. And this equated to 24% of all vacancies at that time. And analysis by McKinsey suggests a growing demand for skills and an increasing skills mismatch. And this is definitely something I've experienced in my business career, not just in the UK, but it is quite profound in the UK. We've got around 7 million additional workers are predicted to be underskilled by 2030. Now that's not long. And certainly if we're going to be a world leader in green energy, and we're going to build all the large infrastructure projects such as HS2 and many, many others, and we're going to prepare students for jobs of the future, then we do need to take action today and not kick this into the long grass. And it's easy to kick into the long grass because it's difficult. It's more difficult than what we've been doing. But we do need to address these challenges because skills are central to the government's plans to build back better from the pandemic. And also the Prime Minister's recently announced his lifetime skills guarantee to give adults an opportunity to re-engage in our skills system that will ensure everyone will be able to access the training they need throughout their lives, wherever they live. And wherever they live is also very important. The fact that talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not, is certainly something I have seen very much in my life growing up in Knowsley in Merseyside. And I am absolutely convinced, as is the Prime Minister and Secretary of State, that there is much unlocked talent in this country. And I know as FE providers and employers, many of you also share this belief. But there's much more to come out of the Skills for Jobs white paper. Reforming our skills system will give people the skills they need to re-enter the job market or to move forward in their career. And it will also enable employers to build their skills pipeline to access homegrown higher level skills and boost business innovation and productivity. Again, a challenge in our country that has been a challenge for over a decade. It will support the government's ambition to level up opportunity across the country and to create a dynamic, energised global Britain outside of the European Union. And I know that we all want that. The work you're about to embark on as part of the Skills Accelerator will be critical to achieving this. In fact, we cannot achieve it without it. It's almost impossible for us to meet our net zero goals, for us to build back better after the pandemic without the skills the country needs. And it's going to be a global challenge because many countries will need the same skills, having gone through a very similar experience with the pandemic. So the Skills Accelerator represents a real shift in our approach to local skills planning and delivery. And I'm excited to see how the programme will enable providers and employers to respond to these current skills challenges and future skills challenges and forge those strategic partnerships that will shape the future of skills in this country. So the employer and skills-led skills plans will ensure that technical education and training is aligned to what employers need. And this sounds so simple, but of course, it's not as easily done as is said. It will require you to work together. It will require you ultimately to ensure that learners are able to develop the skills, and we know they'll need the confidence to be able to take those steps as well. That will enable them to get the great jobs and progress their careers. So the Development Fund will facilitate these changes to provision that is required and endorsed by employers. And really what we're seeking here is to have a clear enough plan so that employers are very clear about what it is that's going to drive growth in their business and local communities and offer those opportunities. And those plans are well established enough for providers to be able to invest in that skill training. It will also empower providers and employers to really work together to raise the skill levels in the workforce, and thereby stimulating demand for better jobs and leading to increased innovation and productivity. And that is the cycle, obviously, that we're searching for. I'm confident that the Skills Accelerator will help build capacity to create and deliver excellent collaborative plans that address local skills needs, which in turn will lead to high impact projects that change the lives and prospects of learners up and down the country. But I do want to be clear about one thing. In my conversations that I've had with many people now on this opportunity, everybody agrees with the vision. But in the next breath, they normally say, and this is what we already have here in my college, my part of the world, with my organisation that I work with. And my heart kind of sinks when those conversations take place, because whilst there's some brilliant work going on, it is not at the level required to address the challenges that we face as a country. So this is not more of the same. This is a real opportunity to push beyond where we are today, to push beyond the status quo, to make sure we do not have people unemployed while at the same time 24% of vacancies unfilled, and create these innovative solutions to our systems problems. We'll be looking for proposals that have a genuine, long-lasting impact, that build on the existing good work. There is no doubt there is some brilliant work, but are demonstrably capable of making it to the next level and bringing partnerships that haven't been possible before. I urge you to look beyond the one-year scope of the pilot programme and take the opportunity to be bold to shape the future of skills. I'm very clear that the learning from the Skills Accelerator will directly shape and influence what happens after these pilots and Trailblazers have completed. And finally, I'd like to say, to offer you my heartfelt thanks for all the work you've done in actually keeping our skills system going over the last year and keeping the learners with hope. And I know that's been difficult under the challenges of the year that we've had, but the way that you've coped with those challenges gives me every confidence that you'll be able to cope with the next set of challenges, which were already there, but in a way have been accelerated and brought much more keenly into focus by the pandemic. So I'm grateful that for the interest you've shown, for the desire and passion that you've shown in this area. I am really excited to see the transformational and collaborative proposals that will come out of the programme. We're building on some really, really excellent work, working with employers to design apprenticeship standards, working with employers to build T-levels, which those that are already involved in T-levels, pretty much everybody thinks are fantastic. So we have some really good foundations, but we know that the challenge ahead of us requires us to do something transformational. So enjoy the event. Please ask lots of questions. The team are here to answer those. Good luck with your bids, but I hope those bids will be ambitious, collaborative, and will change the direction of technical skills and technical education in our country and give everybody the opportunity that they deserve to take part in rebuilding our country's economy. So thank you very much for your time, your effort, your interest, and good luck with the rest of the event.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us today. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, colleagues. I'm going to hand over now to Alan Krikorian, who's going to give us a brief overview of local skills improvement plans before we open up for questions. So as I said at the start, what we want to do is keep any information that we share quite brief to be able to set aside lots of time for questions, and I'd urge you to sort of use the chat box to put in questions that are coming to mind for the local skills improvement plans as Alan goes through his brief slides. If I could just clarify that in this part of the session, if we can just keep our questions specific to local skills improvement plans, it will help us to be able to monitor that. And then as we go through into the next session on the strategic development fund, there will be a time to post questions in specifically for the SDF as well. and then we can try and address those questions in Steve's slot. So Alan, over to you.
Thanks, Riz, and good morning, everyone. And just to follow up on that, I think for the two questions that have been posted for the Minister, unfortunately, she wasn't able to stay for Q&A today, but it'd be good if Anna and Anne could just clarify whether they're referring to the SDF in them or whether they're referring to the LSIPs. Just helps us to deal with the questions. And yes, I'm sure we can circulate slides of this event. So just on local skills improvement plans, the white paper set out what they were and was clear that there'd be a permanent feature of a reformed skills infrastructure, and that's why we're putting them on a statutory footing. But the white paper obviously was in very high level terms, so we've tried to use the prospectus to flesh out in a bit more detail what we mean by LSIPs and our sense of how we think they should be created. I mean, you'll see it's still fairly high level. These are genuine trailblazers, and the prospectus is just the second step in our journey after the white paper. So this is a genuine opportunity to shape how the LSIPs can best work in practice. So we want to work with the successful trailblazers to develop the detail of the policy and work out how we can best make a reality of employer-led skills planning before a wider national rollout. So although there's still a lot of detail to work out, I think the longer term direction of travel is clear. We're looking at to develop a reform system which puts employers firmly at the heart of local skills planning, that empowers providers to respond more flexibly and innovatively to the needs of employers, and also that will end up redesigning the funding and accountability structures to incentivise and enable the outcomes we want to see. And there will be a consultation, as I'm sure many of you know, on funding and accountability. It's due out in the spring. It looks quite spring-like out of my window today, so I think that should be coming out quite soon. And through the LSIPs, we want to see greater direct and dynamic interaction between employers and providers. And it's this sort of relationship and the dynamism that's as important as the product itself. I mean, the products will still be important, as in the plan that's produced, but we should be clear. We're clear that we don't want these to be massive, lengthy documents setting out in detail the entirety of all the skills needs in an area, or some sort of master plan detailing all the provision to be offered. Rather, they should be focusing on the key strategic priorities for change. We're looking to get a set of shared objectives agreed between employers and providers and backed by local stakeholders, so that when they're turned into action, they'll help us move skills provision more closely to the needs of the labour markets in local areas. So almost like the LSIPs themselves are almost like the physical manifestation of the stronger and more dynamic partnership that we want to embed between providers and employers. Can we move to slide 8, please, Natalie? So the next slide replays the critical success factors from the prospectus, and these should be interpreted as the things that we think are needed for a successful trailblazer, and for this reason they're closely linked to the assessment criteria. I'm not going to go through them all. I just wanted to highlight a few key points. The work of the trailblazers needs to be led by those who know the skills of the local economy best. So this is employers working closely with providers and also other local partners. And in particular, we want to build on the work that skills advisory panels have been undertaking over the last few years, and the knowledge and expertise residing in mayoral combined authorities and local enterprise partnerships. So they've got important roles to play in helping to shape the plans. At the heart of any successful trailblazer, there'll need to be a strong employer voice, and that's why we're testing the market to come forward with the best models of employer representation. But we're clear that this means that any successful employer representative body in this EOI process will need to do more than just represent the needs of their own members, important though they are. They'll need to be informed by the full range of employers, from SMEs through to multinationals, and from all relevant sectors of the local economy. Finally, a point I wanted to make was that this is all about driving a significant change programme, as Minister Keegan said. So that will require vision and leadership to take the best of what there is and move it to the next level. And if we can get this right, then the skills plans can become a sort of central framework for future government investment in the FE sector, so that giving government the confidence that when it invests, it will be investing in a set of priorities that have been agreed between employers, providers and key local stakeholders. Can you go to slide 9, please, Natalie? So this is just a short slide on process. Hopefully the prospectus was clear about the process we'll be following. We have tried to keep it light touch. We do recognise we're only giving you 5 weeks, and we know that everyone's got a lot on already. Just to reiterate the point that to be eligible to bid for a LSIP trailblazer, applicants will need to be an employer representative body. So these are business membership organisations that are independent of government and whose primary purpose is to serve the needs of employers and business. Well, if for eligible bids, we'll assess them against our 5 assessment criteria. We will add up the scores for them. We will then put a quality threshold, a sort of a line, and any bids that are above that line will go forward to the portfolio stage. And what we're looking to do there is trying to make sure that we get a good spread of trailblazers like across the country in different types of local area, etc. If you're successful, we'll then have a process, again, hopefully very light touch, where you can apply for funding to support your trailblazer. We deliberately separated that from the EOI process to keep the two things, keep this first step as straightforward as it can be. But there will be money to support the trailblazers. And just please note that if you're selected as a trailblazer, it doesn't guarantee any funding. We will obviously have to assess bids on their merits and ask for evidence-based bids, which we will assess. And there'll be further guidance on the types of things that we'll be prepared to support financially at that next stage. So I think that's what I was going to say. On the next slide, then please, and back over to you, Riz. Riz, I think you're mute still.
I think that's worked now. Has that worked? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Riz.
Fantastic. Okay. Yes, the mute button is the bane of my life, but there we go. Thanks, Alan, and thanks to everybody for submitting questions through the chat box. So
Riz, you've gone off on mute again, I'm afraid. Should I just pick up on this? Because I think I was going to say a little bit more about some of the questions that we have.
Go for it, Alan. Go for it.
So,
Technology's not my friend today, but I'll keep an eye on the chat, so you go for it.
So what thanks for submitting the questions, which I can see are flying in. We'll answer as many as we can today, but anything that's not answered will be answered separately and later, and we will keep answering those questions as long as they keep coming in over the next few days and weeks. But just wanted to pick up a few that have come in prior to the event. I'll start with an easy one. There's a question about when we say that we'll have to expect draft LSIPs to be produced by the end of 2021, just to confirm that means the calendar year, not the academic year or the financial year. Obviously, we can discuss with Trailblazers what we mean by a draft and how good a draft has to be, but I think that's a question for another day. Also on geography, there's been a lot of, I think, people talking about geography, and it's obviously a fundamental consideration for both the Trailblazers and indeed the SDF pilots. So just a couple of points about our approach, because we're asking employer representative bodies to propose the geography they think is most conducive. We want LSIP geography to be informed and led by the needs of businesses and local labour markets. You'll have seen in the text that we're looking for areas to be sufficiently compact and coherent to enable effective decision making, but equally they need to have sufficient scale to encompass enough employers and providers to make a difference. That in some or indeed many cases, existing definitions of areas, such as the geography underpinning the skills advisory panels and LEPs, will be the right geography. So, if you think the geography you've got is widely accepted, don't break the wheel. I mean, you go with that geography. In other cases, though, you may think there's better definitions of what we would call functional economic areas that are more conducive to developing an effective LSIP. And rather than government sort of decreeing and saying this is the geography that you must follow, we wanted to give people the opportunity to suggest something better, particularly in the light of the fact that I'm sure you're aware that government's looking again at its sense of economic geography, and there might actually be changes to some of the established geography in due course of time anyway. So hopefully that explains why we've gone for that approach. I do appreciate it has put the ball in your court and made extra work for you. But we do have a process by which we're asking you to make the best evidence-backed case for your geography that we will then assess along with the other assessment criteria. So there are the two that I wanted to pick up first. Riz, can I pass back to you, see if you can help me to work my way through the questions?
Absolutely. So we've got the first question that's coming from Emma Grant, and Emma's asking, do LSIP bids have to cover more than one sector, or can they focus on just one?
Well, I think if there's a local area where there was only one really important sector in the economy, then that might be okay. I think that we would be expecting them to be pretty holistic, to be honest. We're not looking to say, it's not like the IoT program, Institute of Technology program, where we said we want to focus on level 4 or 5 STEM. We're saying we want to focus on those areas where they're the most pressing issues and the biggest mismatch between demand and supply. If it happens to be in just one sector, then fine. I think that's probably unlikely. So I think these are about looking at holistic local labour markets.
Great, thanks, Alan. And a question from Jerry, who says, in addition to proposing an appropriate geographical region for LSIP, is it possible to propose specific sectors, for example, engineering, manufacturing, that might be focused on for this Trailblazer phase, given the tight timescales?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful to do in bids. I think there's obviously a bit of a trade-off here. If you come in with a bid that's very clear that we're going to do X, Y, and Z, it might lead DfE to start thinking, has this been properly sort of tested with relevant partners and so on? Equally, to come in with no idea might undermine the credibility of the bid. So I think having a sense of where you think the LSIP is likely to focus is helpful. But obviously, this is about the focus at the moment is who is best placed to lead a Trailblazer, rather than what, we're not looking to second guess what the LSIP at the end of it might look like.
Great. Thank you, Alan. Question from Anna. So some ERPs cover a large geographical area across two LEP boundaries, which can prove challenging. What are your expectations regarding geographical areas? And they also have SAPs as well in their geographical area, it seems.
Yeah, so I think geography is not an easy concept. I think if there was a single definition of what constituted a functional economic area that absolutely everyone agreed on, then it would be quite straightforward. But I don't think that is the case. I think if there is an ERB that covers a very large area, I think that the ERB needs to think about, do I put in a bid covering that large area and make the case as to why that area is not too big? Or do I think actually it's better to take a subset of that area and focus a bid on the subset of that area? Now, I imagine it's the case that where ERBs have members in both parts of a large area, they may not want to choose between them themselves and risk upsetting half of their membership. So in that case, it's perfectly fine for an ERB to put in more than one bid and let DfE, as the assessors, solve that problem for them.
Thanks, Alan. Dawn's asking, Dawn says thank you, and says, Alan, thanks, Alan. I'm bringing together our business representative groups in a local consortia. Can I submit the EOI through my role in the county council, or do I need to identify a lead body from one consortia member to submit the application?
So I think this will have to come from a single body, and that single body will need to be an employer representative body as defined in the prospectus. Yeah, partly it's because we need to have a single point of contact. Ultimately, if we're going to give funding, it needs to go to someone, and collaborations and partnerships are very welcome. They will need to have an identified lead, though. Otherwise, we could end up, if there was 5 people in a partnership, having to sort of work out with 5 people what they're all going to get money-wise. So it will need to come from a single ERB as defined in the prospectus. But you should be clear in your applications if that, if it's part of a sort of formal collaboration, then we'd like to know the details of the people in that collaboration.
Great, thanks, Alan. And Paul's asking, what's the timeline for second stage bids, given you want most of the money spending by March 2022?
Yeah, good question. I think it will have to be as soon as possible. So I think what we'll do is we will hope to be announcing the successful Trailblazers by the end of June and start of July. I think in that case, what we'll be wanting to do is convene people pretty quickly to have a bit of a kick-off sort of launch type event. And I think at that stage, we'd want to basically release the guidance, saying, we'll have a bit of a process around it. I think then we'll have to, we haven't got a full-time table planned out. We'll look at things like summer holidays, but I think, we'd want to give you maybe say 4 weeks or so to come up with a bid and work through the department. I mean, for those of you, I'm sure you've worked with government before, there will be processes to go through when it comes to spending public money. So we need to find that right balance between making sure that we are giving money for things that are valid and necessary and that will add value. But equally, as you're suggesting, we need to be able to spend the money by March. So we will give more information on a timescale once we have that worked out. But I would imagine we'd want to kick it off pretty much as soon as we have announced the successful Trailblazers.
Thanks, Alan. And Daniel has put a question in the chat saying, similarly to geography, what is the optimum or minimum number of provided expected in a functional economic area / geography?
Yeah, so that's sort of I suppose the $64 billion question, isn't it? And I'm not actually going to give you an answer to that because I don't have it. If we knew it, I think would have said it in the prospectus. So I think this is one where, and it will also vary. I think it would vary depending on what type of area you are. In a big sort of rural area, it would be different to a much more smaller compact city area. So I can't give you an answer to that. As I say, we're trying to not be really prescriptive on this, and I think sometimes with government, we can be very prescriptive and make people's lives easier in that way. But then equally, we then have the thing that, well, you're imposing something top down that might not work in every area. So on this one, we are actually sort of giving you the challenge, I'm afraid, of coming up with the best geography. I think you will know your local areas much better than we do. I mean, certainly better than I do. So our job will be to, assess the case that you put forward, and that's both a combination of the sort of words and the narrative and the arguments that you make, but also the evidence that you use to make, to back up your case. So, I think it's incumbent on you to say, this is what we're proposing, this is why we think it works, and here's the evidence that supports that case.
Thank you, Alan. A question from Michael Norton. So what is the requirement to demonstrate clear partnership between the ERB, key employers, stakeholders, providers, LEPs and MCAs? What does the lead submitter have to provide to verify this partnership exists and that the local skills improvement plans will be dynamic with buy-in from all main parties?
Yeah, okay, good question, thank you. On this one, I think it's obviously good to have some evidence that when you say I've got so and so and so and so with me supporting me, that it's not just the sort of bidder's word for it. So I think, but back to the IT program, which I used to run before this, we actually asked for declarations of formal letters and so on. But with 5 weeks, we didn't want to go down a route that sort of had sort of formal sort of letters of intent signed by a chief executive or whatever. So I think some form, if having signatures on the bid, just a statement saying that this is backed by so and so, I think would be helpful, just cooperation. I don't think we're going to be going through and validating. If you say that you've got so and so supporting you, we're not going to be going to them to check is this a genuine collaboration. Obviously it would come out in the fullness of time if it wasn't genuine. So I think if you can, it's probably wise to get be very clear about who's in your bid. If you would like to submit sort of statements that say in black and white, that this, I'm giving my full support signed on behalf of the organisation, that will be fine. But we're very much on this one asking you to state to it is in the knowledge that if you put something down that doesn't transpire in the future, it won't make you look very good. So if people think that we need to be clearer about that, then let us know, and we could come back and say we're requiring X, Y, and Z. But I'd just rather not be imposing more requirements in view of the fact that we've only got this sort of, well, it's less than 5 week window now.
Thanks, Alan. Apologies, Ellie, I missed your question in the chat, but Ellie is asking, would a catapult centre be considered an ERB?
So on individuals, and I didn't see that one actually. I think on individual questions, and we have had one or two of these already, where there's a very specific, if it's about an organisation, which I think on that one, I'd rather than just trying to answer it now, because I know a bit about catapults, but I don't know enough about how they're set up and their governance arrangements and so on. So on that one, I think I'd rather come back to you with an answer that's sort of a bit one-to-one. In general, we will share all answers. I know there's a network of catapults, but where there's someone saying very specifically, am I eligible? That answer only really affects that person. So I think on that one, we'll just come back to you. If you can we'll take this question away from here. I'll come back to you with a one-to-one answer, if that's okay.
Great, thanks, Alan.
I think that would apply if there's any others in that sort of, if you're not quite clear from the prospectus, then do feel free to drop us a line and say, look, this is who I am. Do you think I'm eligible? I think I saw a question earlier about will we give a sort of pre-approval? Not as such. If in doubt, then ask us is what I would say, because it will save people going through filling an application form in that maybe we don't want anyone doing nugatory work.
Thanks, Alan. I think James's question is quite similar to the one that you've just answered in terms of guidance about specific provision being included in the outline proposals. So more around the, what specifics do they need to include a project that encompasses training, specific training packages with an end goal of a job creation, for example. So I think that's quite similar to the question that you just picked up around what should the EOI that the colleagues come back with, what should sort of, are there any specific details that should be included? enclosed within that.
Yeah. Well, we did put some
Thank
examples
you.
in the prospectus of the types of things that we envisage possibly coming out of local skills improvement plans. But I'm going to give a bit of a slightly different analogy, and that is back to the Institute of Technology programme, where government decided for itself that there was a big problem in level 4 and 5 STEM subjects, and therefore ran a specific competition back with money to try and fill that gap. In a future world, we may not have to do that, because it would have actually been people coming together and saying, look, we've got a really pressing skills need in this area. Employers, providers agree it. We think we need to do X, Y, and Z to close that gap. We would like to make a bid for the government for money to support that. And actually, the sort of problem identification as well as the solution will have been generated in the sector. And the government will then be able to take a view on whether it wants to sort of support that and invest in that, as opposed to what we did in the IT programme, where we said, this is the problem and this is our solution that we're giving to people. So I don't want to be specific. It's probably not about individual sort of jobs. It's about anything that can demonstrably show how provision has been more closely aligned to what employers need. That's what we're after.
Great, thanks, Alan. Michael's come back with a comment. Is there a concern that we may have multiple organisations considering themselves the ERB for a geographical area and undermining the overall partnership working? How will this be avoided?
Yeah. So if we had 2 bids from competing ERBs in one geographical area, then clearly we'd have to choose between them, because we're not going to set up competing Trailblazers in the same area. So I think it is a case then of people, for yourselves, the question that you have to answer is, do I collaborate or do I compete with someone else? Because there won't be 2 Trailblazers in the same place. I think from my perspective, it would be better for people to collaborate than to compete. So that's a steer I would give. But if people don't want to for whatever reason, then we will simply assess one bid against another.
Great, thanks, Alan. And Henry wants to know if the DfE has a list of, or who does the DfE consider to be employer representative bodies? Can we give a few examples? And I think the prospectus is quite clear on this, but we may want to pick this up separately, or now, Alan, it's up to you.
Well, I mean, thanks, Liz. I think we obviously gave an example in the white paper, the Chambers of Commerce, but they're not the only people who can do this type of role. I know Federation of Small Businesses have shown interest in this. So we don't have an exhaustive list. I don't think there's any precise, generally agreed sort of definition of one. We've set out the best definition that we can do in the prospectus. I think it is fairly clear, but then I would say that because I helped to draft it. If it's not clear enough and it leaves you in any doubt, then as I mentioned before, I think the best thing to do is to come back to us and say, this is our entity, this is how we're constructed. Do you think that we will be eligible for it to be an ERB? And we will answer that question, because as I said, I don't want people to do a load of work and then to fall at the first hurdle when they could have clarified that with us beforehand.
Great, thank you, Alan. I can't see any more questions actually. I think I've managed to get through them all, but if I've missed your question, please do come back and flag. It's very difficult to try and navigate around this chat. I don't find Teams the easiest, but I'm hoping that I've managed to capture everything. So thank you for all your questions, and thank you, Alan, for taking us through that. That was super helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Riz.
Okay, so if we can move on then, we're going to move on to the Strategic Development Fund now, and Steve Orham's going to lead us through this section. In this section, again, like you did previously, please feel free to submit answers via the chat, and so of questions specific to the Strategic Development Fund. But without further ado, Steve, over to you.
Thanks, Riz. So, hello everybody. This is going to take similar format to Alan, as Riz said. So I'll just sort of do a brief overview and then give as much time for questions as possible. I think the first thing to probably emphasise, which has been said and emphasised throughout, is that this is a pilot year. So encouraging everybody to sort of get involved and help shape what this looks like over the coming year is a really important thing. And I know today it's those that are eligible to lead an application because we're limited on numbers that have been invited, but this is, as we said before, being recorded, and therefore others outside of that, other people that can join in, other providers will get a chance to hear what's being said. So I think that's the first thing I'd say. As you'll know, it's a £65 million fund. That is split roughly 60% capital and 40% revenue. And you'll also have seen that we're looking to pilot this in somewhere between 12 and 16 areas. And I think that's, you can do if you do the maths, that's sort of an average per area in terms of spend of between £4 and £6 million. So that sort of gives you a sense probably of the sort of size of projects that we're looking for in this, and I'll come back about that in a while. What we're looking for, which you'd have seen through the prospectus, we're looking for collaboration in an area. We're looking for priorities for that area to be identified. We want this fund sort of catalyze change around those priorities, but also to help overcome any barriers. And also, because it's the pilot year, it's really interesting to us to understand what those barriers are. So it's not just about overcoming them, it's about understanding what they are, so we can learn from the pilot. Talked about priorities. Those priorities could be existing priorities that have already been identified through various local plans. Now those priorities may have changed because of the last sort of 12 months and the pandemic, but also where a Trailblazer for the LSIP is in the same place as a SDF pilot, then it could be priorities that are sort of emerging through the work you've done when you've been thinking about putting in the LSIP bid. So there's all sorts of ways that those priorities can be identified. What we're keen is to see that the providers, the ERB, the people in that collaboration have agreed on those priorities, and it's a very short time scale. It's not an amount of money that's going to completely transform everything that needs to be transformed. So there's also a sort of prioritization of priorities as well. So that's another thing just to sort of highlight. I mean, the Minister touched on this as well, higher skills for learners, that sort of strategic employer engagement. We've talked about college business centres were a specific aspect of that, but that's not the only thing we're funding. In fact, we're only looking for a small number of those. And I know there have been sort of people have read the white paper in a way that the Strategic Development Fund is there to fund college business centres and only college business centres. That's not the case, as you'll now have seen through the prospectus. So I guess sort of coming on to a bit of the sort of processy type stuff. As with the LSIPs, this is a fund that needs to be spent by March 2022, which is not an easy ask to spend that wisely, spend that well. But that is the nature of this particular pilot. So when you're thinking about priorities and what you might be able to, what you want to do to make those changes, also just keep that in mind as well, that there is a sort of, well, there is a deadline on the spend. So the prospectus is fairly high level. There's a fair amount of guidance in there in terms of what we will and won't fund. They are, as you'll see in there, there's some examples as well. So that's sort of hopefully helping you towards understanding what we can and can't fund with this. So we're really keen to hear what it is that you think needs funding. I think the thing to keep our eyes on in all this, because there is, whilst I've talked about the the sort of immediacy of the fund only being available until March 2022. Obviously, it is a fund that is there to begin that longer journey that's talked about in the white paper. So, Natalie, if you could move on to the critical success factors slide. So I think it's really important to keep these in mind when thinking about putting your expressions of interest in, and also as we get into those pilots. And none of this is a surprise, I'm sure, from well, you'd have read these in the prospectus, but we've talked about them quite a lot, that stronger relationship between all colleges within a pilot area and other providers. So it's not just about colleges. That stronger and more effective relationship with employers, a shift towards collaboration around those priorities, starting to put some of those building blocks in place, because it's a short amount of time, so that we're moving and are ready for the future. Talked about the barriers existing, so understanding what those are. And then, of course, there is the fact that we will be funding projects through this. So once we know who the pilot areas are, there's then projects and delivering them that we'll agree with the different pilot areas. So it's sort of a mix of delivery in this year, but with a huge emphasis on shifting towards the vision of the white paper. So, Natalie, do you want to do the sort of the process slide, which looks remarkably similar to the LSIP one? As Alan said, we recognise 5 weeks is a short amount of time. It's now 4 weeks, I think, left to put an expression of interest in. The thing that we've been juggling on the SDF, of course, is that we need to give the pilot areas as much time as possible to actually make with the fund. So the sooner we can agree who the pilot areas are, and the sooner we can agree with them what it is that we're funding, the longer we've got to make it. So there is a balance between the different sort of stages and how long we take around those. But we do recognise 5 weeks, now 4, is quite a short amount of time. It is a 2-stage process. So that, and coming back to this being a light touch expression of interest, the first stage in this is to select the pilot areas, and you'll have seen the sort of the criteria for those. What we've not done, or what we've been able to do, is not ask you to put in lots and lots of detail at this stage about the projects that you want funded to make those changes. We want some detail, but not enough detail to be able to fund them straight away. Now that's so that it's only the pilot areas that are putting that effort in once they know their pilot areas. That's the process around. That's why it's the two stages. It does mean less work for everybody, if you see what I mean, and also it means we can move into the project development phase sooner as well. So that's the 2-stage one. We expect the pilots to be announced late June, early July. Depends how many we get in, depends how complex they are, and all the rest of it. The deadline is the same as the LSIPs one, the 25th of May. So, as I say, we'll crack on as quickly as we can with that, but we can't give a firm date because we don't know exactly what we're going to get in. What we're really keen, as I've said a number of times, is this is about shifting towards that long-term vision. So you will have also seen in the prospectus that for those that have submitted an expression of interest but have not been successful as a pilot, there is a small fund available that you will be able to bid into to maintain and build on that collaboration and the work you've done towards getting the expression of interest in. This is not This is not it's just the pilots that we're then interested in once we selected the pilots. Obviously, the work within the pilots is much bigger and much more, but we do want to maintain that momentum through that fund. And then just really sort of coming to the end of this sort of scoot across it, one in terms of the lead applicant, which is what who's been invited to this, the reason we've chosen who we've chosen as lead applicants is both in terms of the breadth of the type of provision that you offer, but also the age range, so both 16 to 19 and also adults. So it's that broadness, but we are looking for the broad collaborations across providers. So there's a big difference between, it's not, lead applicant is a touch point, it's a convener for the expression of interest, but we do expect all providers in the area to be relevant, to be part of the collaboration. I think just the final thing then, what I would say is, in terms of the sort of how to, and there's been some questions that we've had around how to approach this, what's the most important thing, so to speak. I think getting the geography right is obviously really important. Same with the LSIPs, having that functional area that then leads you to which providers does that cover, and that also leads you to what priorities, and then which are the projects that you would like funding or you feel need funding in order to deal with those priorities that you've identified. And finally, I would encourage everybody to look at the application form quite early on to see exactly, not least what we're asking for, but also how many words we're actually asking. And I recognize that sometimes fewer words can actually be more difficult to write, because you still need to do all the work in terms of what is it that we're putting forward. But I would encourage people to look at that, because where we've said it's light touch, they're not huge amounts of words that we're after, but obviously the right words, if you see what I mean. So Riz, I think that's my scoot over the top of that, so we can.
Thanks, Steve. That's super helpful. Sorry, if anybody's not on mute, could you please mute yourself? Because again, I get lots of feedback. But now what we'll do is spend some time going through questions. Do keep submitting your questions through the chat function. We have just been, so apologies for this, but we didn't realise that Teams restricts the number of participants that can contribute to the chat to the first 100. So apologies to colleagues on the call who aren't able to contribute to the chat, but also to see the chat. What we will do is gather all the questions here and make sure that they're reflected in Jagger. So just if there are any questions that you're wanting to ask and you're not able to get access to the chat, then please do submit them via Jagger. But what we will do is the team will collate all the questions that have been asked today. We'll make sure the answers are reflected so that you can all see them. So just apologies for that, the joys of technology. So thanks, Steve. As I say, we'll start with some questions that were submitted ahead of the event, and then we'll go through and talk to the questions in the chat box. So
yeah, I think you might. Either Riz is frozen or I've frozen. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, Steve, you're fine.
Yeah, okay, that's good. So as Riz said, we've got a couple of, we've had some questions beforehand, and they sort of cover two sort of themes. So I'm going to sort of address them that way. The first one is around the different roles within this, the role of the lead applicant, the providers, in particular. So as we've said, the lead applicant needs to be either a General FE college, an IoT licensee, or a specially designated institution that has a breadth of coverage, as I described earlier. The role of that lead applicant is to get the expression of interest in and to be the point of contact for this expression of interest. That is very different to who is eligible to receive the fund. And any provider who is providing level 3, 4, 5 technical education projects that have been identified is eligible to receive the fund. And just for clarity, because this is a question that's come up a bit, the actual fund will not automatically flow through the lead applicant. What we expect to happen is we'll have the lead applicant with providers as part of that collaboration. There will be a number of, and we're calling them projects just to make it sort of easy, but there will be a number of projects to address different priorities. And when it comes to negotiating those projects and how they're going to be funded, we would expect the money either to go to the individual providers within a project, or in some cases it might make sense to us and to you that actually there is a lead provider for that particular project, but that doesn't have to be the lead applicant. So this is very much the first stage to get people together, get the expression of interest in. Clarifies that. Then there may be some sort of sub questions to that we'll pick up in the chat. And then the other question that's coming around eligibility is what happens if there is no eligible lead applicant in an area, and we don't want an area of the country to not be able to to not have the opportunity to become a pilot area because of that. So that's where we've touched on in the prospectus in terms of exceptional circumstances. So where you've defined a geography and it's a sensible geography and we can see why it's a sensible geography, then if there isn't a college that we've said needs to be they can't have an Ofsted grade that's less than good or a published notice to improve. Now, I know sometimes it can take a while. The college has turned around, but actually it takes a while to sort of come out of those categories. So in those situations, that we will take that as an exceptional circumstance, so long as this doesn't distract that college as a lead applicant from turning the college around. So we don't want this to be a distraction, but we recognise that it takes a while to come out and we don't want to disadvantage any area. So hopefully that clarifies those two. And have we lost Riz completely, Alan?
No, I'm here. Yeah.
Brilliant.
I've dialed back in on my phone actually because yes, Wi-Fi is causing major issues today. Isn't that always the case when you're trying to lead a session? But no, I'm back, and there are lots of questions for you, Steve. So I'll start with Michael, who says I'll start with Anne, who says the minister referred to colleges. The EOI also refers to other providers. Do you see collaboration including various types of providers, and would that be a plus?
So absolutely we do. As I was saying, we see the collaboration including as many types of providers as possible, and actually if we have said if in the geography as defined there is a statutory FE provider within that geography, then they have to be consulted and they have to have the opportunity to join that collaboration. And we would want to see a very collaboration. For those that aren't statutory, we would also really want to see and would be very encouraged by lots of different types of providers coming together in that area. This is an area response.
Thanks, Steve. I think Michael's question is quite similar in terms of is every college designated in a geographical area, and will a submission be expected to include participants and sign up to that collaboration? And yeah, I think you've answered that question already. We're saying yes, collaboration is the key here to driving forward the change. Jerry is asking, how would you see SDF pilots which support additional staffing costs, for example, supporting a sustainable longer term change to provision, given that they are limited to March, the end of March 2022?
Yeah, and this is a really difficult, it's a very good question, because we are in a situation where we have a fund until March 2022. We don't know what will happen beyond that. But we do know that the LSIPs will be in place. So the SDF can't support any additional staffing costs beyond March the 31st. I think so really that's a sort of a decision for that provider, whether you look at how you can sort of, whatever the costs are, that you can cover those beyond that, because something has been sort of pump primed, or whatever word you want to use, or you do that with a view to there's a long vision behind the white paper, and it's not that there is no definite yes or no beyond March 31st. So that's probably a fairly unsatisfactory answer, but it is the situation we sort of find ourselves in.
Thanks, Steve. And as you say, because these are pilots, there's learning from these that we need to take into account, but also, yeah, they are pilots until the end of March 2022. Yeah. So Rose is asking, if a college has campuses in 2 different geographical areas, could the college support 2 bids?
Yes, absolutely, because it's about, and that's sort of why I went through the geography, then which are the right providers, what are the priorities, and therefore what are the projects we need. So absolutely, if that college has campuses in two different geographical areas, then yes, they can be in two bids.
Thanks, Steve. And Ruth's question is, please can you clarify who you need to invite to be part of an SDF application? Is it only providers who are offering post-16 technical qualifications to a breadth of learners? Also, do HEIs offering level 6 qualifications meet the level 4-5 criteria?
So taking the second half of that, I'm assuming that means if they are offering,
I'm surmising here, but I assume if they're offering level 6 and it's above 4 and 5, do they, so inclusive 4, 5 and 6 is what I'm assuming, but Ruth, do clarify for us if that's okay.
So, and there's two, so that's part of the question. There's, as I've sort of been saying, there's 2 parts to this. I think there's who do you have to, and that's statutory FE providers, and I think we clarified that on Jago who that is, but and then HEIs absolutely are eligible to receive funding, but it has to be for those projects as identified in that in the expression of interest, which may have some level 4-5 that's happening in an HEI within them.
Thanks, Steve. And yeah, Ruth has clarified that is what she meant, so that's great. Hiten is asking, with regards to funding, do bidders need to provide any match?
No, they don't. If they want to, they can, but they don't have to, because it's a pilot. It's not a sort of rollout of a full fund. So we didn't think it was the it wasn't the right thing to ask for match funding within the pilot.
Okay, thanks, Steve. And Simon is asking, is a lead for SDF bid also able to be a partner of an LSIP bid?
Yeah, absolutely, and ideally, the in a geographical area where an LSIP Trailblazer bid is being developed, and ideally we'd also like an SDF bid being developed, and everyone working together to bring those two together at the same time, which is why we've aligned the timeline, and we will consider we will look at the areas where they have both of those. We will look upon those very favourably, because that moves us towards that longer vision.
Thanks, Steve. And Alison is asking if we did we confirm bids for both funds will be looked at favourably, so i.e. areas who opt to concentrate their efforts on one of the bids will be at a disadvantage. My instinct is no, but I'll let you I'll let you come in on that.
Well, I think so. I think with this, there's a number of things to say probably. So partly what I've just said, but also different organisations are leading the two different bids, and actually concentrating on both holistically is the thing we would look favorably on. However, if we get a bid for just one or the other through from an area, that doesn't rule you out for the one that you've bid for. And just, it's probably fairly obvious, and it's in the prospectus, but we have 6 to 8 Trailblazer areas. We have 12 to 16 SDF pilot areas. Of that 12 to 16 SDF, half of them will be Trailblazers and half of them won't.
Great, thanks, Steve. Moving on to Tracy's questions. Tracy, you're asking whether we can clarify what a sensible geography is. So Alan covered this, and we can come back to it at the end if helpful, but we're not dictating geography, so it really is about the areas to come together and kind of put a case forward about what sensible geography, local geography looks like in that space, but we can come back to you at the end if that's helpful. And Henry is asking, will SDF projects that focus on a range of sectors be viewed more favourably, or can projects focus on one key sector facing skills shortages?
So I think it's probably very similar to the question, Alan. We're not.
Sorry, Steve. I think you're cutting out slightly. So I think.
Shall I try again? Is that? I'll come off camera just to. Hopefully that makes it better. Am I less cutting out now? Yeah.
Yes, that's better.
So really, this is, as I say, it's similar to the answer Alan gave earlier. This really depends on your area. So we are not deliberately going to favour a bid with a range of sectors. What we will favour are bids that can show that they've taken the local priorities that are the priorities, and have made sensible decisions about what's achievable within those, within both the time frame and the money, etc., etc. Now, if that is a single sector, that could well be right for some areas. For other areas, it might not. I think the thing that we would want to avoid is people sort of coming together in quite a small collaboration to deal with something that they're focused on, when that is not really the priority for the area more generally. So I hope that makes sense.
It does. Thank you, Steve. And Anne says you cut out earlier when you were answering her question, and can she just clarify if providers involved have to be delivering level 4, 5, 6, or can they provide access routes to the higher levels?
So do provide. So is this access routes as in level 2 that then leads to level 3, 4, 5? Is that the question? If that is the question, then
Yes, I think that is the question, Steve.
yeah. So yes, so long as those levels, so long as it is a route through to those level 3, 4, 5, rather than a sort of blanket any level 2. So show the route.
Okay, great, thank you. That's fine. And I think we've managed to get through all of the questions. So Tony, you're asking some clarity about those institutes in a geography where we have to ask to be part, who may choose or not. So did you say they would choose those who are eligible to lead, i.e. colleges, IoTs, designated, etc.? I'm not sure I understand the question, Tony. So be helpful if you could post a clarification on that and what your question is aimed at. So is it aimed at the SDF? That would be really helpful. But I think
so I think I understand Tony's question. It's slightly broader than those who are eligible to be leads. It is also other statutory FE providers. So for example, sixth form colleges are not eligible to lead, but they do have to be consulted if they are in that geography and be invited to be part of that collaboration. So it is slightly broader, but it's not every provider in the area.
Great. Thanks, Steve. And I think you've absolutely nailed Tony's question, because he said thank you. And Daniel's asking, do providers in an area have to formally opt in or opt out of SDF?
So I think that's the same answer, really. If they're a statutory FE provider, then we want to understand why they're not part of the SDF if they're not. Now that and really that's why they have chosen not to be.
Okay, great. And then Michael is asking if there's a list of providers that need to be invited with their geography so they can be ticked off in the submission.
So we can put a definition up on Jagger without knowing the geography. We can't say who it is, but let me take that away. We might be able to provide a link through to a list of those across the country and where they're based. I presume that's what Michael's asking, so you can just check and make sure that you've got everybody you need to. So we'll take that one away and put something on Jagger around that.
Great, thanks, Steve. And Ruth is asking, do we have to articulate in our EOI why providers have not chosen to be part of our application?
Yes.
Okay. Nice and simple.
I mean, the reason is that we want this to be a true sort of consultation with those that have opted out. So understanding the reasons behind them not being part of that is important, rather than they just chose not to. So it doesn't need to be a huge spiel, but we do need to understand the reasoning behind them not being part of it.
Thanks, Steve. And then a last question from that's coming from Anna. Do you see ACL services as having a key role? So
we certainly see where it fits with the priorities and fits with the prospectus, them having a role for definite. You know, they are considered to be one of the providers that, where it makes sense, would be part of the bid.
Okay, thanks. And a question from Andrew, and then I'm going to wrap us up. At the risk of asking the same question, just for absolute clarity, are you saying sixth form colleges must be asked to be involved? This is relevant, as if the geography is too far reaching, then the number of providers involved could be very large.
But we are saying that, yes. So I think, you know, when you start looking at the geography, anyhow, yes, we are saying that.
And I think that sort of answers Anne's question as well. The next question, Mark is saying that Jagger is very complex and not clear where to find details. Any other place to get the details? So it is Jagger that we're posting questions and answers on. But if helpful, we can think we can sort of share maybe a guide of how to navigate Jagger or something.
Just to the two other questions that are part of the things that are popping up, just to be really clear, we're not talking about school sixth forms. We are talking specifically about sixth form colleges, so FE statutory providers, not sixth forms within schools. I quite understand that there would be a lot of sixth forms, but that's not what we're saying.
Okie dokie, thank you. And Zoe has provided a link to Jagger as if by magic. So there you go, Anna. That should answer your question. So we are absolutely right out of time. Actually, we said we would finish for 11. So we're going to try and keep to time. And so I wanted to sort of say a big thank you to Mr. Keegan for taking that time to join us, and for Alan and Steve for talking us through the local skills improvement plans and the strategic development fund, and to all of you for coming along today and taking part in this conversation. I really hope that you got what you needed out of this event. Please, you know, bear with us if your questions weren't answered. As I said, the team will make sure that we take note of all questions and post responses on Jagger. So do make sure that you've registered on Jagger. Zoe's put the link in the chat. But for colleagues who aren't able to see the chat, we will also try and get that link out to you. But there are instructions of how to do that in the prospectus. So there are instructions in the prospectus of how to sign up for and access Jagger. So point you towards there. Jagger questions close on the 17th of May. And as we said earlier, the deadline for receiving applications is the 25th of May. So we really look forward to seeing all your applications. And thank you so much for being here, for being interested, and for asking lots of questions. It's made our time together really kind of fly, hasn't it? So we've been talking for an hour and a half now, and it doesn't feel that long at all. But thank you so much for taking the time out to come along today. Yes, good luck with your applications, and take care, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you.